Welcome to part 2 of 5 more things that I wish I knew. Hey, that rhymed. I have made all the mistakes. I don't want you to have to make all the mistakes that I did. So please go ahead and watch part 1 if you hadn't already and come right back here for part 2. Let's get right into it. Number 1, zones. Do you know what zone you're in? Why does it matter? Who cares about the zone? I just want to grow some freaking tomatoes. Now, I can only speak for what I know of, and I know that the zones that I'm referring to are from the United States, and I do believe in Canada as well. If they're in any other part of the world, I apologize. I don't actually know. This is the plant hardiness zone map. Wow. I'm in Massachusetts. My zone is 6B. The higher the number, the warmer the climate. These warmer climates, they can grow plants throughout the year more than we can. But they also can't grow plants that need cool weather. So someone from say here or here probably won't be able to grow like a Macintosh apple tree, for example, because it needs cold weather. Or certain things like berries, they need something called chill hours. But someone from these zones, I can't grow an avocado tree because it needs a different climate. And if you have questions about a specific plant, you can go ahead and just Google how to grow an avocado tree in my zip code and then type in your zip code. Number 2, plant life cycle. Okay, so not all plants play by the same rules, all right? Some are just one season, some stick around for years, and some take 2 years just because they're not really sure what to do. And colder climates tend to have more that are considered annuals than not because frost would kill them off. But for example, peppers I treat as an annual, but it's not. You can actually overwinter them. You can prune them back, put them in your house, and overwinter them. The next year, they'll come back. So it's actually not an annual, but colder climates treat them as annuals. In warmer climates, you can definitely get your peppers year after year after year, and that's called perennial. So that's one way that plant life cycles are different, but then there's another way. It's how they actually decide to grow. And I'm talking about bush versus vine. So knowing how your plant actually grows is a big deal too, because then you'll know how to space it and if it needs support, what support to give it. Some things have 2 different ways of growing. For example, tomatoes. You can either get a bush variety or a vine variety. Beans, you can get a bush variety or a vine variety. When it comes to tomatoes, there's something called determinate or indeterminate. Determinate tomatoes are bush tomatoes. They will grow to a determined size. They will put off a determined amount of fruit. Indeterminate, they climb, they're vines, and the only reason they'll die is from disease or frost. I personally had no idea that tomatoes grew in any other way other than a bush because I've only grown them this is my 3rd year now, and I've only ever grown bush. I didn't know about this. I learned about it last year. So now that I have a bigger garden, next year, I'm going to try myself for the first time growing indeterminates. And you can trellis these in so many different ways, and I'm really excited to try them all. Everything I've referred to as far as determinate and indeterminate, that was referring to things that fruit. For example, tomatoes, right? But what about leafy greens? Well, if you start seeing your leafy greens bolt, or in another word, flower, that means it's trying to come to the end of its life cycle, and you do not want it to. As long as you still have plenty of time in the growing season, you want to pull off those flowers. What happens is that's the plant signaling, I believe that my life is coming to an end. I have to put out seed, aka flower, and then I'm going to die off. And the flavor of the leaves start to change. So if you're growing basil and you start seeing little flowers, pull those suckers off right away because you do not want to see those on leafy greens. Whereas a fruiting plant, you do want to see the flowers. And that's because where flowers come are where the fruit comes. Number 3, succession sowing. Okay, guys, I remember the first time I learned about succession sowing, because I remember being like, oh, well, if I'm going to plant something, you kind of just plant it all in the beginning of the year. And then I don't even need a refrigerator. I can just leave it in the ground, and just grab one at a time as I need it. Well, it turns out that's not the case. You can't really do that. The longer you leave things in the ground, it's going to continue to grow and or die or change its flavor. So you want to succession sow, and you can do this depending on how much space you have. So for example, you could take one, say, raised bed, and say you want 3 heads of lettuce a week, maybe one of each variety. Well, make one row and sow those 3 heads of lettuce one week. The next week, take another row, do the same thing. The next week, take another row, do the same thing. By week 5 or 6, you should be able to start harvesting the very first one. And now you can sow ones right where you harvested those first ones. So it takes up a whole bed, but you're able to have fresh lettuce every week. Lettuce is a cool loving crop, so you can't do that forever unless you have it in the shade or indoors. But succession sowing is definitely something that you should be thinking about. Beans are something that will put out its fruit, and as long as you continue to pick it, it will continue to grow more fruit. But eventually it does come to its last growing cycle. Toward the end of its life, its fruit isn't as big or as bountiful. So you're going to want to succession sow. A few weeks after you sow your first beans, go ahead and sow another round of beans. By the time that second round is ready, your first round of beans will likely be on its last legs. That's what succession sowing is. Number 4, when to harvest. I wish somebody had told me that you can harvest things too late and you can harvest things too early, but some things you can harvest at any point of its life cycle. So a lot of things that are like leafy greens, like herbs, you can harvest pretty much whenever you want. Always leave at least a third of the plant though. You don't want to harvest the whole thing or there's nothing left to actually grow, And the more you harvest at a time, the more time it's going to take for that plant to actually grow back. So keep that in mind. But there are certain things like baby spinach. It's literally just young spinach. You can harvest it at any point. And it's better that way. It's more tender and it has a sweeter flavor. But there's certain things that you can't do that with. You can't just harvest a watermelon whenever you please. It needs time to ripen on the vine. It actually has signals showing you when it's ready to harvest and when it's not. For a watermelon specifically, right where the stem of the watermelon is, you look at the tendril that's right next to it. If that's all dry and basically gone, it's ready to go, pretty much. Also, if you're growing it on the ground versus in a trellis, take a look at the underside. If the underside is yellow and not white, you're pretty much ready to go. But things like cucumbers, which are also in the same family as watermelons, if you don't pick them in time, the plant's going to die. No! And here's the reason why. With cucumbers, the plant says to itself, I'm going to make my seed now. And when a cucumber plant makes its seed, it's making the fruit. The seed is in the inside. If that seed is allowed to mature, i.e. the plant is overripe, then the plant thinks, I have made my seed, I can die. So what you want to do is you want to make sure you're harvesting your cucumbers on time and regularly. My very first cucumber plant that I grew, I wish I had a picture of it, but I barely grew it, honestly. The cucumber I harvested from it was like white and yellow and fat and short. It was really ridiculous. But once your cucumbers start losing its green color, that's a pretty good signal to start to harvest it. But then there are certain things like zucchini, which are in the same family as cucumbers. You can actually pick those at a pretty young point and they're actually fairly tasty. So anytime you're ready to harvest something, just Google it first. And sometimes it's just a matter of something changing color, like a tomato. Right when it's at the breaker point of it changing color. So that's a really good visual representation. As long as you have a red variety, once it starts turning orange, that's when I like to pick it off. If I have a lot of pest pressure. If I don't have a lot of pest pressure, I believe, some people say this isn't true for them, but for me, I do believe that if it ripens on the vine, it's sweeter. A lot of people say that the flavor is fully developed once it's turning orange, but I find it to get slightly sweeter once it ripens on the vine. So I like to get it a bit more on the red side. Not fully red, but a bit more on the red side when I pick my tomatoes. So that's definitely something I wish I knew ahead of time, especially for those darn cucumbers. Number 5, this is the last one before the bonus. How many plants you actually need. You know exactly how many heads of lettuce you're going to eat in a week because you know what you buy at the grocery store now. But what about things that produce more than just one thing? And you don't know how many it produces, and you don't know how often it produces, or if it produces once or a bunch of times. And I learned this the hard way with beans. I bought a bush bean my first year gardening, and I only bought one. I got one bush bean, and I got honestly, probably 12 beans off of it, and I couldn't eat the 3 beans at a time that I was harvesting. So I realized, oh wow, you need a lot more bean plants than just one. I did the same thing with peppers. That year I got 1 jalapeno plant, 1 bell pepper plant, and 1 bush bean plant. Yeah, I was wrong. I was very wrong. Tomatoes, you might want 2 to 3 plants depending on the type of plant you get, determinate or indeterminate, and how big your family is, and honestly, how much you like tomatoes. Peppers, you might want 2 to 3 per person, and zucchini, maybe 1 or 2 max. Zucchini is a really prolific producer, so you don't need that many zucchini plants. But I would definitely think about what you like to eat and then Google how many plants you might need per person. This year, what I'm doing with my beans is I grew 9 bean plants and I saved every single bean I harvested from it. And then I'm growing 22 bean plants and I'm going to save every single bean that I harvest from that as well. And I want to see the difference in having less plants but having more harvests of the plants, or growing more plants but having less harvest because I grew those later in the year. That's going to be an interesting video. We are at the bonus. Pollination. Has this ever confused anyone else, or was it just me? Some plants have what they call perfect flowers, where each flower has the both male and female parts. You don't really need pollinators. And some plants have a female flower separately from a male flower on the same plant. And some plants have a female plant and a male plant. And then you can actually pollinate things yourself manually too, which I had a hilarious time doing. Okay. For me, I really felt confused by all of this, and it felt super overwhelming. And it goes back to one of my tips in the previous video, plant families. If you know what some of your plant families are, they have similar pollination. Tomatoes and peppers, for example, those are in the nightshade family. Those both do not need pollinators. Cucurbits grow with a male flower and a female flower. And you can literally take a male flower and then push it into the female flower, and that's pollinating it. But they also do need to be pollinated several times. If you've ever grown a cucumber or something like that, and you see it grow in strange, weird shapes, or maybe it starts to grow really nice and then starts to die off, that's a pollination issue. I've got 5 more of these I wish I knews for you in my next video, so you should check that out. But if you haven't seen the first one, you've got to check that one out first because it's got some doozies in it. And again, these are all things that I've done myself, mistakes I made myself, and or just general, man, my life could have been easier if I knew that. So go ahead and check those out right now. I don't know why they're called perennial rather than perannual, because I feel like if I'm describing a perennial versus an annual, I have to say perennial versus annual, and that doesn't make any sense. 1 bell pepper and 1 bean